Some slight technical problems today, as usual. Good morning. So, I just want to say a few quick things before we get on with looking at Zine groups, right? Just to remind you that this course is called Critical Thinking. And a few weeks back, maybe halfway through, I took stock and said, sort of, I don't know what critical thinking is or why we are doing it in the course and so on. Of course, I was pretending to an extent, thinking that we should also always keep reflecting on what is critical thinking and why the university wants you to do it or why you would want to do it or why even what its use is. Okay, we assume it's a good thing, right? Do we? Yeah. I mean, some people don't think it's a good thing. They think, no, don't. You're always so critical. Put your head down and work hard. Don't ask questions. Get on with the job. And that leads to fascism, right? I was just following orders. I think there's much more that we can say about critical thinking. That will take more than 14 weeks. And I think one of the things that I said a few weeks back, all right, please. One of the things I said a few weeks back was that it would be more than 14 weeks work, 15 weeks work to talk about what critical thinking is or should be. And anyway, all courses should have some or be critical thinking, right? That should be, it shouldn't be a separate thing. It should be saturated within everything we do. But let's think about just the word critical now, right? What is critical? I've taken and I kind of assumed that critical meant critique because, I don't know, I'm an academic. Since the Enlightenment with Immanuel Kant, the philosopher, the critique of aesthetics, the critique of reason, they have been, and right up to the present, they have been, that version of criticism has been the standard for academic work. You make a critique of some material. But critical also, especially in this era, in the current conjuncture, should I write that on the board? The current conjuncture. Do you come across this phrase? Right, I'm talking about critical thinking. In the current conjuncture, that means conjuncture is where we are in this contemporary world, the arrangement of institutional and political and social circumstance, situation, right? Just a glorified way of saying situation, I suppose. In the current conjuncture, what is the current conjuncture? And you can name so many different things that are relevant to thinking where we are now. We are in Vietnam, we are in Asia. Vietnam is thinking about its situation in relation to China. They have just been having a meeting to discuss the world's largest trade agreement with ASEAN, and China is involved in that. Since the North America, and so the Trans-Pacific Partnership with America collapsed because Trump pulled America out of it. The next largest trade context, part of our conjuncture currently, includes Vietnam in this world's largest. Okay, that's part of it. The conjuncture also would have to take into account historical factors. Everything from French colonialism, American occupation, the end of the Second War, the end of the Third War, etc., Doi Moi, and all of that. The current conjuncture includes COVID and the ongoing crisis of global capitalism. I've talked to you about stagnation, that global capitalism is not really moving. Only in a couple of places is there any kind of movement or growth. Right? So there is a sense in which critical in the current conjuncture, the other big, COVID is one big context for what we're doing. The other one is, what do we call it? Global catastrophe on an environmental scale, not seen since the dinosaurs, right? If it was that the dinosaurs were destroyed by an asteroid hitting the Earth and throwing up dust and causing some kind of like decades and decades of winter and they died out, we are about to make the same thing possible on our planet through carbon, excess carbon in the atmosphere, causing a kind of endless winter. Or, since 1945, nuclear destruction, always still a possibility. Imagine Donald Trump still has his finger on the button. He's trying to they're trying to drag him out of the White House and he's trying to press the button just to spite everyone. It's possible. Let's not think about that. Somebody should. Okay, but the environmental crisis is a huge part of where we're at because it will affect industry. It will affect ASEAN. It will affect what Vietnam can do. It affects what China can do. China is pushing environmental correct ideas very strongly. The sense of critical that I realized was very different was related to this environmental thing when the Fukushima nuclear facility went critical. What does that mean? Critical, the Fukushima nuclear facility, because there was that earthquake and then huge tsunami, tidal wave, that washed into the Fukushima nuclear plant that's right on the coast, and it caused 2 of the 4 reactors to get saturated by seawater, and then the fusion rods that are inside them that burn hot went critical. And that means, right, critical in the sense of going to explode. And in fact, massive radiation leak came out of Fukushima into the ocean. This was not critique in the Kantian sense. It was something much greater. This is like global critique. It was like planet criticizing what we're doing. So the critical conjuncture we could talk about, the crisis point we're in, the current crisis on an economic, on an environmental, on a political, and on a social scale. Think of demographics, think of that, right? I mean, the stagnation of capitalism is something that we have to think about here because the current conjuncture includes Vietnam's future plan Here's the graph, right? And we want the graph to go up. And that involves education. And I want to show you how. With Doi Moi, renovation, new thinking, the economy, Vietnam made a very sensible but a bit of a gamble in basically saying to the world, we have a growing young population and very low wages. With those low wages, which are very attractive to global corporations, Vietnam will open up to those corporations, invite them to produce their product in Vietnam. I don't know, Nike shoes, Samsung phones, all sorts of things being made in Vietnam. And why would corporations want to do that? Because there are low wages and government approved, low tax, low restriction. In the special economic zones, you have the potential or the possibility of easily introducing production work in Vietnam. And that's attractive to corporations because it's cheaper to do that work in Vietnam than in America or than in Japan or Korea or Indonesia or wherever. Indonesia, maybe not. Okay, very cheap labor in Indonesia too still. The gamble of the Vietnam government is something like that introducing these companies in a special economic zone will slowly bring higher wages to Vietnam. And there's like a sweet spot for the corporations, maybe 20 or 30 years, where the low wages of the workforce in Vietnam are really useful to it, but that won't last. The more people that have those kind of jobs, then demanding wage increases, because the conditions are hard, right? And so people will say, we want better conditions. A series of micro strikes and wildcat strikes and unionization. And you must have read that Vietnam has joined the International Labour Organization, the World Labour Union Organization, to introduce so-called free unions as opposed to government unions. Right? Workers get organized, wages go up. Global corporations like Nike, who want to be, at one level, want to be seen as good corporations and not exploiting people, they want a good reputation, also don't want to spend much money on wages. They will stay only for a while. The gamble is that while these special economic zones are operating, enough people will earn enough wages to put their children through university. All of that, socialization of higher education, everyone contributes a little bit and so on. The whole society makes a big effort to learn English, to send children, send the generations of your generation and the one before and the next one to university, and to then pivot. Pivot means you change orientation from a low-wage production economy, making sneakers for Nike, to a high-end, high-skilled, university-trained, high-tech production economy. Hence, that's why you see the special economic zones that were introduced are now being displaced a little bit by these new science parks, research and development parks, because rather than producing product, rather than assembling shoes or phones or whatever, it's inventing stuff that really is the profitable part of capitalism. And for that, you need high-skilled workforce and a certain level, a certain part of know-how, science, technology, the general intellect. You need to know how these things are designed, how they're marketed, how they're made, what the new innovations are, and you need to be making those innovations by using your newly trained workforce that have been sent to university by the parents who earned money, with wages increasing because of that import of a period, a 30-year period or so, a 40-year period of low-waged global production. So I want to say this is why the university, and what is the university, is really important. Thinking about what it is and what we do in terms of critical thinking, because it has implications for all sorts of levels of the current conjuncture. Now the issue is not, let me try and get to the second part of this. Sorry. The issue is not about whether or not that gamble was worth it. I think it was the only real option for the government to say, we have this opportunity to join the global production cycle, and we can join at the level of production because we have low wages. Corporations will want to come here, but that cannot last, because once you start earning, the costs of production inexorably rise. Right? And if the costs of production rise, companies will start to look elsewhere. So there's like a sweet spot where you're employed for 30 or 40 years. You have this opportunity to produce, but you need to pivot to your own production force, your own innovations in that period. So the university and the development of high-skilled workers through the university is crucial to this pivot. Not that you all have to work in science parks, but some people have to work in science parks, and some people have to have high-level skills to service those science parks, to do all the financial services, social services, intellectual services, to keep that pivot working. Now the question is, the real question in the current conjuncture, where Vietnam has invested in this gamble, building universities, getting people to build universities, allowing there to be private universities like TDT. The question is, will this work? In the current conjuncture, it's not clear that it will work. If you look at what has happened historically, Japan did this in the 1960s. It had low labor costs, and it used that and then made a massive investment in electronics. At first, they just copied the electronics of the West. So Japanese products, when I grew up, it's Japanese. It's a copy, it won't be as good. They're just copying what American companies or English companies were doing. I remember we were into motorcycle, same I, and a Harley Davidson was #1, and then a British bike, #2, Triumph or Norton, or Italian bike, #3, Ducati, and a Yamaha, you would burn it if you were a real biker. But now then the Yamaha 4.4 came out, 754, The Honda 604 came out. In the 70s, Japan started to innovate and improve because its investment in education, investment in science, and investment in innovation started to work. In the cultural sphere, say in popular culture, in music culture, they invented the Sony Walkman. Absolutely revolutionized the music industry. I mean, you don't probably realize how significant that was. When I grew up, you could only listen to music if you had the radio with you. You couldn't carry music with you. You could only carry a radio station. And that was attached to some batteries that didn't last long. Now, you can put every song there ever was in your pocket because of Japanese innovation. So they were a success while America was still strong, and America freaked out and so invested heavily in Japanese business, in its innovations. And you notice that since the 1990s, the Japanese economy has been stagnant. But yes, they did develop a high-tech sector, and they did develop advanced, high-skill, high education, sophisticated workforce, and a very sophisticated society, and clean and all of that, right? They went to that level. If you look at Korea, Korea at the start was the client of Japan doing the production for Japanese companies. And they pivoted. Korean products were worse than Japanese products, and they were cheaper, and the labor force was cheaper, but within a shorter period of time, they were able to pivot to a high-tech workforce, a high-tech economy and success. South Korea, I mean, not the North, unfortunately. Taiwan. All right, there are some political issues with China and so on, but Taiwan also had a very large young population in the 70s, 60s, 70s, into the 80s. And it did have its period of low-wage mass production, which it tried to then pivot to high-tech. It really pushed literacy, like 99% English literacy, and students going to cram schools and all of that. It really pushed that in the 80s and 90s, even into 2000, and then wanted to move its economy to high-tech, especially precision instruments and high-tech injection molding and so on. But its situation in global capitalism did not allow it to succeed in that. Taiwan's pivot to high-tech didn't work as well as it did for Japan or for Korea. You're not using a Taiwanese phone, are you? You're not watching a Taiwanese television. You're not, the high-tech sector was not one where they thrived. So what Vietnam does, it could be like Japan or like Korea, or it could be like Taiwan, depending on what happens in the university sector, not just in the sciences, across the board. So it's really crucial to think what is critical about our current situation. Okay, the difference between Japan and Korea and Taiwan is that, right, American capital outsourced its production to Japan first. Japan caught up in a way and then outsourced. You know this phrase, outsourced? So Nike no longer produces in the US, but it outsources its production to Vietnam. Japan outsourced its electronics production after a period of doing it in Japan, It then moved, because of wages increasing, it moved to high-tech production, and it outsourced the production part to Korea. Korea came up, and then Korea also outsourced its production to Indonesia, to Bangladesh, to places like that. Taiwan did not have the possibility of outsourcing its production because it went for high-tech precision instruments, which you can't really move to somewhere else. They have to be done in a lab. They have to be done in the science park. Taiwan has a lot of science parks. And they didn't really have a colonial relationship to a low-wage providing place. Does Vietnam need that? I mean, maybe. Look at what China is doing. China made its economy a huge success by producing cheap plastic commodities for the world and exporting them. Because Chinese labor, millions, and in fact billion of them, was cheap, but not anymore. Chinese labor costs are increasing. Strikes are off the charts, so many. I mean, they control the media, so you don't hear about it as much, but there are many. And China really now is pivoting to high tech. They have invested so heavily in education that my wife, for example, she teaches online to China right now, and their English is 90% fluent. Right? They really pushed it so hard, a bit earlier than Vietnam, right? And they are pivoting to a high-tech economy, and I think they will succeed because where are they going to outsource their production? They will outsource it to Africa. And they are investing massively in Africa to get that relationship. If Vietnam moves to a high-tech production sector, it has a large young population. When you look at demographics, right? The science of studying how many people are how old in a population. The demos, the people, and then the numbers. Making graphs about the numbers, right? And the Vietnam population, the average age is very low. Japan, Taiwan, even Korea now, they are getting much older. I mean, one of the things for Japan that's really a problem with stagnation is that their university sector now is shrinking because the boom of young people in the 60s and 70s is ending. There aren't enough young people in Japan to fill the universities. So they are opening campuses and trying to get students from Vietnam, from Laos, from Cambodia. They've opened Nagoya University in Hanoi and so on. Because they understand the university is crucial to maintaining that pivot to a high-tech economy, whether it be science or social. Now, China will always fill its universities. It has so many people. Vietnam is at the stage where we can fill the university. There are more people wanting to come to university than there are places. And that's probably going to be true for another 15, 20 years at least, if not more, because Vietnam's in the population boom cycle, although our friend Nha, who sits next to me in the office, you know, the teacher in our faculty, he studies demographics, and he has shown that Vietnam's graph is quicker. We're getting to the point of going to go to a decline faster than most countries, most similar countries, Taiwan, Japan, Korea. Now, whether that's got to do with what happened with the wars or just that Vietnam is sort of coming late to this graph, But you are at the cusp of the boom, but that boom might be a bit shorter. Vietnam will need to outsource cheap production. Otherwise, there will be a glut. Where will Vietnam outsource cheap production? Have to look to Cambodia and Laos, but that's not a big enough population. Have to look to India. Have to look to Burma, Myanmar. Have to look there. China is locked up. Anyway, that's the critical conjunction. Is that part of it is not at all for me to think about. That's for the party or the theorists, the planners to think about. But it's why the university is so critical to this current conjuncture. All right, I'm going to stop there. It's a bit short today for this part, but what to do?